Hi everybody, welcome to the next episode of Leading Ladies podcast with Green Kite, and I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome my friend and a previous professional coach of mine, Kay White. I think Sarah and I spoke about her in the podcast we did, and she had a really marked impact on the way we approach work and where we thought about ourselves within the working environment. And I'm just so pleased that you're here today to share some nuggets of wisdom, I hope, and just to explain more about your experience of seeing women develop in the workplace and the surroundings, the environment that we now have to face. And also the reason that I found Kay so valuable is you have a background in the insurance industry, which I think was really valuable to me, and in understanding, because you understood the world that we were in, and then that made a marked difference to us. And so I would say that if I look back over my 40 years of working life, you had a major impact on me quite late in my career, I think, and I would love to have known you earlier in that. So I'm going to pass over to you, Kay, and ask you to do a brief intro. What we're going to be talking about today is busting the imposter syndrome, which I think is a very known saying. Certainly imposter syndrome is a phrase, but we're going to talk about what it means and why you think we should be busting it. So I'm going to hand over to you, Kay, to explain a bit about yourself and your background and lead into this topic, if I may.
Well, thank you, Karen. And I would say I wish I'd known me earlier in my career as well. Back to your point. So I started my career as a secretary in Willis, at the time Willis, Faber and Dumas. And I worked my way up through twists and turns on roller coaster rides to become a divisional director in global property and casualty. It was about, a 20-year trajectory, getting lost along the way, getting very frustrated along the way, being ultimately, at the time, 2000, one of only 4 broking account executives, so broker women, in a group team of about 40. So I definitely grew up around the sort of roughy-tufty world, the sort of swearing like a sailor language, the very un-PC language at the time, and the kind of being confused about whether you needed to be a bloke in a dress, and I say this or whether you had to sort of acquiesce and be, smaller than you were. And I'm 6 foot tall as well, which, adds to it. So it was very confusing. And in 2002, I was turning into somebody I didn't like, swearing like a sailor, pushing people around, not physically, but clearly. And I had just got married, and my husband was in the underwriting side, and he would go home at about 5, be home about sort of 5:45, and I'd be going into a meeting at 5:45 or 6:15, or let's have a 6:30. And I just thought, I can't do this, because if I don't manage my performance, someone else will, because I was getting so frustrated. And as I know, a lot of women don't have the mental capacity to think, what next, while I'm still doing this?
Yeah.
So I worked out financially and endowment policy-wise and notice-wise that I had a few months that I could breathe, resign, and then work out what next and how. So that was 2002. And by 2006, I'd worked out, having worked part-time for a couple of charities, and also taken some time and done some consulting work, actually, in the insurance industry, that I wanted to start my own business. And I kind of fell into it through somebody seeing something for me that I hadn't seen yet. He worked at Aon, used to work with him. And when I met up with him, he was different. And I said, what's happened to you? You're different. You're interested in me. You're asking questions, and you're, observing, and you're being quiet. And
listening.
And listening. Oh, my goodness, what's happened? And he said to me, I've had a coach, and she reminds me of you. And at the time, in 2005, a coach was something that, my parents took us on holiday on a coach. Yeah. A coach wasn't something that you had that supported you, that was very well, not very well known. Now everyone positions themselves as a coach. But, the essence of going off literally that day, being an implementer and finding out about what that was, and then putting myself on a course, and then literally from there on. So I now have a 6-figure business. 6-figure? Yes, 6-figure. What am I saying? And starting from scratch and using, let's say, drawing upon my experience, not only as a coach now, but also as remembering what it was like in a team. Yeah. So when I met you, Karen, I remember you were very frustrated.
Oh, yes.
And I remember looking at your face thinking, oh, there's something going on. I'm churning something up with you at an event. And the event actually was called Why Not You?
Yeah.
And at the time, ironically,
Remember that
these
very
years
well.
later,
Yeah.
we hosted it on a boat on the Thames. And ironically, that focus was all about the imposter syndrome. Why not you? Why not
Yeah.
you? Why not you? That was the question. So that's where we met.
It was. And I left that event, and I think part of this, which I would say to everybody, if you have an opportunity to have a professional coach or be able to spend time with somebody like Kay, do it. Because I think I was sort of slightly reluctant about going down that road, but it was, I think, one of the best things I've ever done professionally. And I left that event that you're talking about, and on the train on the way home, I was so many questions and thoughts churning through my head about, God, you've been a bit of a silly cow, and not thinking about these things a bit sooner. And yeah, it made me change the way I thought about myself, or what I should be thinking about, and being clear about what I wanted professionally. You made me spend time thinking about myself, and it's never thinking about what you want out of your career path is never time wasted.
No. Well, one of the things that I will say is you might not be clear about what you want, but let's be clear about what you don't want, because
Yes,
that starts
that's
to direct
true.
you to what you do want.
Yeah.
So it's very easy, women will say, oh, I don't know what I just don't know. So, okay, well, let's look at what you don't want. What are you tolerating? What's driving you nuts? What's waking you up in the night? Those kind of places to start. And I remember when you and I first spoke, on the telephone, because you had this opportunity in a safe place, having been churned up. I often call it snow globing, when you shake up on those snow globes. And I knew that you were churned up. So if it was me, or if it was anyone else, or if it was just you, flying solo, what had happened at that event had made you kind of wake up in a way.
It did. It definitely did. And again, a friend of mine that you spent time with, I would say drag me along to that event. I was thinking, should I say that? She dragged me along to that event.
I don't mind.
I know. And it made me, it was just at the start of a whole new way of thinking about my life in business and what I wanted from it.
And now look at you.
Oh, hey. Yeah. So a whole different career now in a space I really, really love.
And also, Karen, I think critically is owning the space that you're in.
Yeah.
Not apologising for it, or feeling you're not worthy in it, or all of that.
Yeah.
Which is a noise, so much of a noise. And this is what has led us to our subject.
Yes. So let's head into this imposter syndrome discussion, Kay, because we were talking about it earlier, and it's made me think a little bit about some questions I was asked last week about imposter syndrome, where I felt like an imposter. And I think I said to you earlier, it wasn't so much around the business. I've always felt that I could tackle any challenge that came along from a business front. But when I have suffered from imposter syndrome, it's been more around the edges of the business, where when I was early in my career, unsure about how to fit in to scenarios that weren't actually within the business environment, but were related to it, but maybe it's social things that I'd never experienced growing up and things like that. And you sort of touched on it in your introduction about how to dress. Do you dress for what you think the environment is, or do you dress how you want to be?
Yep.
And it takes a while to get to that point where, and maybe we are more relaxed these days in terms of our business environment, which is a good and a bad thing, I think. But, being able to be yourself, in the way that you present yourself, I just think has a massive impact on how successful you are.
Absolutely. I remember I was one of the first in our team to wear trousers as a female. I don't mean that as a man, to wear trousers.
Yeah.
And I remember my boss saying, "Oh, trousers," and it wasn't that they weren't allowed; it was just that they didn't happen.
Yeah.
And the comfortable, and you can still be as glam as we know as you want to be. In which I like tailored, suits me better, blah blah blah. But I didn't want to wear jeans. But at the time, it was a big deal to wear trousers. So when we discussed about me appearing on your podcast, which is I'm honoured, and the fact that it's Sarah and yourself who know each other through me,
yes, we do.
Found each other through different scenarios. And when I met Sarah, she was ready to rip someone's throat out as well at work.
Yeah.
No, and I'm sure she would agree. And that's that whole thing about okay, take myself offline a bit, find out what's really going on, look at what I don't want, all of these different things. And as a subject, when you said what should we, discuss, I had been to a meeting recently where the imposter syndrome was being discussed. And it's such a common phrase now. It's not the sort of phrase that it was. It's now sort of like covers all, if you like. And, oh, she's got the imposter syndrome, or he's got it's not only a female thing, but we are quite good at it, allowing ourselves, this is the phrase, allowing ourselves to feel smaller, to feel less than, to feel not quite ready, not qualified enough.
Do you think now it's been defined and labelled? I know you're going to talk about the history of where it comes from. Defined and labelled that it can be used as an excuse for not tackling things or yourself.
I do. I think organisations can use it as, she's got to sort of settle in, or he's got to settle. Feeling a bit of an imposter, and let me talk about. Versus, and someone actually said at this meeting, syndrome is kind of like a medical thing, and it's not a medical thing. It's, if you look it all up, there's where it came from as it was a phrase, but it isn't anything that's mental health related.
No.
As far as being defined. And it was, anyone can click on Wikipedia. Dr. Pauline Clance and Dr. Susan Imes first coined I'm going to read it, the term imposter syndrome when they published The Imposter Phenomenon in High Achieving Women, Dynamics and Therapeutic Intervention in 1978.
Wow.
So, that is, and they said here, how does it manifest itself? And I know that it did for me in this way, and I'm sure it did for you, as some examples of explaining away your achievements as luck, comparing yourself to others.
Yep.
You never come up great when you compare yourself to others. Wonder if people are serious when they praise you. Assume everyone else's experience is better or more relevant than yours.
Yep.
Brush off success compliments and push on the compliments to others, and expect fraud or the phony police to flush you out any day. Now, assuming you're not something enough, not clever enough, not smart enough, not quick enough, not, mathematically enough, not whatever. Now, what are you thinking when you hear this, Karen?
I recognise that. And, back to the point about the use of the word syndrome. I was surprised, when you said 1970. That's a heck of a long time away, but it feels like imposter syndrome has been talked about really in depth and is a common phrase, perhaps in the last 10 years, maybe longer than that, Kay. I don't know in your experience. So I recognise some of those things, but I also recognise now that I have control over those things. Whereas I think you have to understand how you get control over yourself around those things, because it's, as you say, it's not, that I think that use of the word syndrome is really interesting, and I've not really considered that before. But I think it's about learning how you can counter those feelings that you have. And quite often we make them ourselves. I think we take problems and we don't walk away from them quick enough. We live with them. An issue at work, we live with it, when actually everybody else has just left it at the door as they've gone home, and we've absorbed it, taken it home and worrying about it and waking up thinking about it. And I've learned better to deal with that kind of behaviour better, because it can consume you, can't it?
Oh, totally. And we as women, let me say, I work essentially with women, but I do work with a very few smart men, which is what I've always said, who are open enough. And often they are either encouraged to work with me through someone who's worked with me already, or their wives or partners. And they recognise it as well.
God's sake, don't see Kay.
So the smart men are the exception in my work, but that's not to say, and I don't mean that in a gender way in any, but I understand women. I am, and I've worked with thousands now of women, both in events, both one-to-one, in groups, privately, since 2006. So I really have absorbed. And what's interesting is I could, if I chose to, this is the thing, be really conscious of being an imposter. I didn't go to university. I left school at 16, and then I went and did a secretarial course. I started my work as a secretary at Willis with literally a golf ball typewriter. I didn't have to actually sort of send the carriage return back. But that's how I started. Willis's at the time was kind of like the Rolls Royce of insurance broking, where everyone was related to everybody else, and they'd all been through the army, and they'd all been to university, and I was introduced, this is an example of exactly how it used to be. I was introduced to someone, this is Kay Ridout, which was my maiden name. And this man said, "Oh, Ridout, yes, our gamekeeper's called Ridout." And I didn't even know what a gamekeeper was. And then someone else in Willis was introduced to the chairman at the time, and I won't name him personally, but he said, where do you live? And so he said, oh, I live on an estate in Romford. Oh, an estate? Yes, I've got one of those.
It's not quite the same estate, is it? No.
Exactly. So that was where I grew up. And if I wanted to,
Lloyd's was like that then.
I could most definitely have kept even smaller, if you will.
Yeah.
And now I feel it is, and I said this to you earlier, I think it's a badge of honour to have come from, from not so much nothing, but from savvy and a strong family background and common sense and opportunity. Doors were opened for me, and that's one of my passions, opening doors, rather than, because people open doors for me, but not actually thinking, oh, I haven't got a degree and I'm coaching someone who's on the board of XYZ, and she's come up her way, and who am I to? So I don't have that conversation anymore. I absolutely don't. And I think you kind of come to a place through frustration and also through enough proof, which is what I want to talk about.
Okay.
Where you can look someone in the eye and think, don't need a degree, don't need anything.
Yeah.
You need me for this, not for
and I'm great at that.
Yeah.
I think it's about how you think about your background and your achievements and see them as badges of honour, which I certainly do now. There were various things I wouldn't talk about when I first started the insurance industry. I had no background in the insurance industry, didn't know anybody in it, came down from the Midlands, just completely alien environment. And I think that when I talked about imposter syndrome for me earlier, it was about learning how to fit into the social side of things, which was very strong as it and still is in the insurance industry. And the places you can go, no, I don't give two stuffs about where I go. I'm very happy to be anywhere. But I do understand that as a driver is something to sort of can impact on your working life as well, that you don't feel good enough to be in a place. And so, but I think we also need to cover a bit, and you sort of touched on it there, around setting people up to succeed. It's not enough just to promote somebody and leave them in a space. You've got to set them up and support them to succeed, haven't you? And so that will then, I think, stop people feeling like they're not supposed to be there. It's not just enough to promote somebody, is it?
No, give them
and say,
the title
there's your job.
and
Fantastic. Off you go. Off you go and do that. Because depending on the age, there were times when I was younger in my career, I had certain roles, I thought I'd be fantastic at them now because I know so much more stuff.
Yeah,
I wish I had somebody helping me at that point understand how I could weave my way through dynamics in a boardroom or all those kind of things, which I was very naive about then, but not anymore. So I think setting people up to succeed is a really cool thing if businesses do that. It's not enough to say we need a quota of women, we're going to make sure we promote, so we've got 30% here or whatever it is. If you're going to do that, you've got to make sure that you support them in that capacity.
Absolutely.
Else you're just setting people up to feel less worthy.
So there's the sort of whole idea of training for this and watch a module on that, boardroom. But actually, when you first go into the new role, you absolutely need your stakeholder and probably his or her stakeholders' support and guidance. And so many women say to me, oh, but Kay, I don't want to interrupt. They're so busy and I'm so busy. And I was like, and busy doing what? You are learning, and you're learning who's who in the zoo. When you first start a new role, it's just the same as if you've moved companies. People have to adjust really to you and your new elevated role. And in fact, I think it's more difficult when you're promoted within an organisation unless you just move, because if you moved into another organisation, you've got a chance to reinvent yourself.
You can reinvent yourself, and women move around a lot, don't they? And I sometimes think that's a real driver because you can go somewhere else.
Well, exactly. And I think a lot of the time women don't move around enough. I have a client at the moment who's done 6 years somewhere, and I said to her, so where are you at with thinking it might be time to look more widely? She's like, oh, but I don't know. And I said, because, you get a big boost of salary probably because you're not in the incremental, scale that you are in otherwise. And you also get this chance to reinvent yourself. People don't know all your history and don't remember you as a secretary, if you like, in my experience. They accept you for who you are there. But anyway, to your point, it's so important to have the support, and if you don't have it automatically, to ask for it, to say for at least for that first 3 months, I'd like to have a weekly one-to-one with you, 10, 15 minutes, however it works, just to ask the questions that are coming up for me and also to hear your feedback. What's something, when you first start a new role, what's something that I can do immediately to make a difference, but that won't overwhelm me so that because I'm learning. Where are the bodies buried, for want of a better phrase, rather than, okay, let me take that straight on and run with it when you're just starting out. And I think that's quite a female thing, that we think we have to prove ourselves over and over again really quickly, rather than take a bit of time and insist on a bit of time, but also insist on having more support than you might think you deserve or that you are offered.
Yeah, that's a good point, isn't it, there? You talk about what we think we deserve. I don't think we consider enough what we do need, and it's okay to have that. It's okay to not be perfect the minute you get somewhere new or you walk into something that's challenging. It's okay to ask for structured help and just be. But that, I think, Kay, is then back to something that you helped me really start to understand. I'm not going to call them failures, but what the drivers are, what was important to me in business, what wasn't I doing very well, what was I keeping silent about, and so
tolerating is
what was I tolerating in myself as well as the environment. So I think you have to really start to look at yourself, don't you, and recognise that you're fantastic, but you could be even better if you acknowledge some things about you and ask for help for them, which I'm not sure I was very comfortable doing, because you want to keep a facade of how strong you are, how great you are at doing stuff. I can do anything, it's not a problem. Right, when actually inside you're thinking, oh, geez, trying to just say yes to that. Right,
trying to prove yourself, not having any chinks in your quote armour. But this is one of the things we said about busting the myth. I think there's a lot that happens in the way business is set up to encourage that whole imposter syndrome. I think COVID had a big impact in a positive way for the most part, to allow this working from home, this flexibility, this hybrid working, more than it ever was. I'm not saying it's a solution to everything. And I think, the combination of being in the office, but to have more choice, to have more flexibility, to hear clients say to me, I went nuts because my boss wasn't offering our COO flexibility when she's a young mum and she's brilliant. And I just said, if you let her go because you insist on her being in the office, then I am resigning from every bit of diversity that I'm on, because it just BS. And it worked. She's now working from home 3 days a week when they didn't want her to. She's running circles around to people that needed to be run circles around. And as my client said, I've just proven the point. We don't have to. So I do think that element of being set up for success is huge. And, if you want to have a family, and let's be honest, most women are the main caregiver, but not always, not as much as it was. And men are taking paternity leave. Amazing. Yeah. And I was hearing the other day how a lot of men in the office, quote for one of my clients, are really scathing about it, because it's like, well, why is he at home? He can have a year off. And, this is that whole thing about this balance. And I think this is why it's so interesting where we're at now versus where your children or your grandchildren will be. Yeah. It will be normal. It will be more normal.
I think that may go to some way for companies being able to take advantage of nurturing their talent. So rather than driving a bright, hugely capable and brilliant COO out of a business, because I think one of the things that I've learned is that people don't want to work 3 days a week forever. They just need to work, or 2 days a week at home, or however it structures, in that flexible environment. They're not going to do it forever. It's while they get through certain points in their lives, whether it's looking after young children, whether it's caregiving to elderly parents. It can be a whole heap of things, couldn't it? That is there. And if you keep them through those stages of being flexible, you retain somebody fantastic that knows your company, that loves it, appreciates what you've done for it, and takes all those lessons as they move forward in their career with you. And that they might not be working from home 3 days a week going forward. They might be able to start to in the office as their life changes. And you get to keep talent
And you
than
buy
it
such
disappear.
a huge amount of credit
Yes,
because
do.
you've allowed flexibility or you've encouraged flexibility.
And then people around can see that success and see that it doesn't stop you from. So if you have behaviours like that in structures of a company, then the barriers to being successful in it for a woman, let's say, with lots of things going on, you think it can work. I'm not just going to be sidelined. I can see that there's a way for me to succeed at this point in my life. I haven't got to sort of stop it and start again somewhere else.
Well, also you're setting an example, aren't
Yeah,
you, for
you
the women particularly, but you're also setting an example for the men coming behind you.
That's right.
That, you do take your 3 months off or your 6 months, or you
Yep.
choose how much it is.
Yeah.
Or you do decide to work, you put it down the line saying, unless you don't help me work from home, then I can't do this anymore and I
Yeah.
won't do it anymore. And companies are particularly, this is why it's such a good time to be a woman, pushing her foot down, whatever shoes she wears. And I will say that because I have flats on now. It's a good time to be a woman because statistically, they're trying to retain
Yes.
and promote the talent pipeline for all sorts of reasons, not only the moral reasons, but, what it looks like. I have a client who said, we had to pull someone in off her sort of typewriter equivalent, word processor, whatever, laptop, because we had to present a suite of people that had a woman in it.
Yeah.
Who were going to be broking
Yep.
something because the client wouldn't deal with this otherwise.
Yep.
And it's like, whoa, if that's not a wake-up call, I don't know what is. So this is that whole, I work essentially in financial services, but not solely. So, banking and law and insurance and different modes of finance. And, the setup of it is still so traditional. And I think it's, going to take a while longer for it to feel more of a level playing field. And I've got a couple of books I'm going to recommend, which we'll put in the link, one of which demonstrates how we're dealing as women particularly, dealing with a world that was set up essentially for men.
Yep.
Cars, grand pianos,
Air conditioning systems,
temperature. Absolutely. And that's how it starts, this book. So I won't name it because I don't.
Okay.
It's called Invisible Women, but we'll do a link for it.
Okay.
And another one is called The Paula Principle. And it's based on the second book from, I think it's the Peter Principle, and I should know this off the top of my head, but I don't. The Peter Principle being how a man succeeds. And the Paula Principle talks about how she would always go for a job, and we know this, where she's not quite qualified or not quite got the experience that the job ad is saying, whereas the man, the Paul Principle, will go, I'll give it a go.
Yeah, I'll give it a
Put my hat in
go.
the ring, see what happens.
So how do we, because what I've realised about this imposter syndrome, this kind of space we're talking about, is that we, as the participants, have skin in the game here. It's not something that's just done to us. We allow it to be done to us.
Absolutely.
Okay. So what is it that we can do as individuals to start that change about how we think about ourselves as professionals? What is it that we could do to start to, drive that positive thinking about what we've already achieved? Because I think we forget what we've achieved. I think we forget all the stuff that we've done, and how to start framing those conversations with ourselves that we can then have with other people. What's a good starting point to start to beat an imposter syndrome on the head, Kay, and bust it, Because I like you. I think it's an easy label to put on somebody. It's an easy label to hang, isn't it? Now,
yeah, it's like, oh well, that's the imposter syndrome.
I can't live with that because I feel a real imposter over here. Let's find ways of tackling that.
Yeah, what's that about? What's going on?
Yeah.
So here's one of the first things I always think. What are you saying to yourself? Listen to what you're saying to yourself. Your inner critic is really mean.
Oh, and loud.
And you wouldn't let someone come up to you in the street and say, oh, look at the state of you. Or, don't you're so silly, aren't you? You forgot to say so-and-so. You'd question it. And if nothing else, you'd, react to it versus allowing. So that's one of the first things. Really listen to what you're saying. And is it true? And what evidence do I have of it? So this is the first thing. You can do that on the train, looking out the window, thinking, what was I saying to myself?
Yeah.
And it can be so noisy that you don't actually hear what's going on in the meeting. But still, they're all thinking I'm silly or I'm blushing or, I should have done my nails earlier and make all the different or whatever. And I'm not belittling it because I know how tough it can be. And I really do know how tough it can be. But the first thing is to question your inner critic. And then the other thing is, when we compare ourselves to others, we're always comparing the best of others to what we're going on in our head, because others are only presenting their best self, they think, or what we conceive as their best self, when in fact they've got their own stuff going on.
Yep.
So that's the other thing. And one of the best things, and I did this in an event, which I think you were at, of course you were, is to create a brag sheet, I call it. Now, women don't like bragging. No one really likes someone who shows off. But actually, a brag sheet is about jotting down quietly some of the things you've achieved. So I've written it even down, your personal and professional brag sheet, because I wanted to make sure I got it down for you and for your listeners. Opportunities you've taken.
Yeah.
When you were scared, or when you shouldn't have, if you like. Achievements or surprises that have happened. Something you've made happen that you didn't think was going to happen. And it can be as personal and professional. Where you've made or saved money in the organisation or in your personal life, because you are who you are all the time. And to be very tenacious in one area of your life, you can map that across. It's just whether you're kind of given, quote, permission, or you give yourself permission. Finishing the sentence against the odds, whatever that is. And you can probably finish it about 10 times if you make yourself. How did I do that? And answering that question. Looking at some of the things you have done. And then, yes, I did do that because... Now, these are all a kind of coaching model that I would use, but the client won't necessarily know that I'm using it because I will ask those questions and unpack some things. It's like, okay, well, tell me some of the things that you're most proud of, or how did you do that? What did you actually do? How did you have to think about that? And the idea of having this personal brag sheet is to go to it. It might be in a little notebook you have, it might be on your telephone, so that just before you go into a meeting or just as you're preparing yourself, you remind yourself of all that you have done and can do and that you have, rather than allowing that, dear, what are you going to say? Aren't you going to blush? And you haven't worn the right outfit, that whole noise.
A whole layer of stuff that's going on in your head.
Exactly.
I know.
So what I wanted to introduce you and your listeners to is the work of Carol Dweck, and that's Dwek. And again, and she has, and this is the whole idea of when you first start at an organisation, she advocates, and it goes right back to the school days, the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset.
Yeah.
And the older we get, the more fixed it is. Easy to become.
Yes. Yeah.
I know this, I've done this, I can't do this. I'm just going to read a few examples. Failure is an opportunity to grow. This is the growth mindset. I can learn to do these things. Challenges help me grow. My effort and attitude determine my abilities. Feedback is constructive and I like to try new things. Now that's a growth mindset, which we can recognise.
And I think that's when I first started working with you, I was really uncomfortable with that.
Not knowing.
To know the answers to some of those things. And what are people going to say about me if I ask them those questions?
Yeah, I remember. So a fixed mindset is failure is the limit of my abilities. I'm either good at it or I'm not. That's very fixed, isn't it?
Yep.
I don't like to be challenged. I can either do it or I can't. My potential is predetermined. When I'm frustrated, I give up. Now, I said to you, and you said to me earlier, well, what is it? I said, I want to give you a magic word.
Yeah. What's the magic word, Kay?
The magic word that Carol Dweck, this is absolutely from her book, The Growth Mindset's Magic Word, is the word yet.
Oh, do you know what? And I remember, I remember talking about it and the way that you put that into conversations with me, the word yet. It's, there's an opportunity. I can't, but it's just not yet.
I haven't done that yet.
Yeah, I haven't done that yet.
I haven't been in the boardroom yet. Yet is potential.
It is.
Versus, I haven't ever been in the boardroom. Dunk. Whereas if you actually add the word yet to things for yourself and for the person who's listening, it shows the potential of what you have or how you think that you have. I haven't stood up and presented to a room of 100 people yet.
Yep.
And I'm going to, I could, or I need help for it, but I haven't done it yet.
Yeah. I think it changes your own way of thinking as well. I think that certainly when you I didn't know you were doing it to me, by the way, Kay, at that time. But now I recognise it when you raise this thing. I think, oh yeah, I remember that. So it is that yet, isn't it? But it
I
makes
think it
you
works
think
everywhere.
differently. Makes you think differently about yourself, because then you realise the potential and the opportunities are there. They're just not at the right time. It's just not yet. It's never no. You said to me, it's never no. It's not yet.
I know, and I mean, you can hear this by your boss saying, well, yes, of course you're going to go that way, just not quite yet. And then that's not to say, well, necessarily pushing back. It's like, well, okay, what's got to happen? What do you want to see me doing? What am I doing now that I'm not doing to be ready to be yet? What would you do if you were me? Not saying all those things straight in the moment, but questioning the I'm not ready yet. Okay, this is great. Tell me what I need to be doing.
Yeah.
And often they won't know.
Yeah.
Or they won't be able to articulate it. So it's like, okay, well, let me go away. Let me think about things, and let's have can we come back
and come back with suggestions, and you think about what you need. I think that's back to being in control of things, isn't it?
Definitely. And that's that myth busting, the imposter, I'm not ready to do it, or you don't seem ready.
Yeah.
Okay, great. That's some good feedback. Tell me what I need to be doing.
Yeah. And then making them think about why they've said that.
Yeah.
And they might then think, well, actually, yes, you are ready. Because there's that start to challenge, I think. One of the things I remember as well, Kay, when we worked together, was about the voice and language. And so when you went through that list of things earlier, saying what things you've achieved, what have you done, have that to, I always think as well, say them out loud.
Yeah.
Say them out loud, not in a train or anything, but just
say
them out loud when you're on those moments. You're in the kitchen, whatever. I don't care. Say them out loud, because finding your voice, finding your physical voice, and how you phrase things, and finding a way that's, I want to use the authentic word, and I was trying not to, that suits you in particular, about how you can describe what you do, what your skills are, what you can bring to something, why you want to go in and say, I could do that if you allowed me to do this, or gave me the opportunity.
What your growth areas are,
so
you want to say as well.
Finding a way of articulating that's true to yourself. You've got to say these things out loud, and then you start to hear them. Then it's not just wrapped up inside your head. You start to hear them. And so I used to mutter around the house, and people were like, what's she doing? She's saying things out loud. So you made me think about language and my voice. And it started to make me feel more confident about my abilities and what I'd done, and being able to articulate those as skills.
Yes, Karen.
And not just a list
to be able to say them out loud and not blink or not.
Yeah.
Well, as a great example, I was working with someone this very week who said, and she's on the board of quite a big organisation. She said, well, I'm sort of doing a PhD.
What do you mean, sort of?
I'm
so sorry. Well, you're on.
I said to her, sort of. She said sort of about 3 times, and in it was, I'm sort of doing a PhD. And I let her continue, as a good coach does. And then I stopped and I said, a couple of qualifying questions and observations for you. And I said, what's with the sort of? It's I kind of am on board of, or I sort of am. And she said, well, I don't like ram it down everyone's throats, and I don't want people to question whether I'm studying. And I said, you're going to be a doctor of something, and you don't have to be the expert for the rest of the board, but you're following a path for you, and you're being supported for it. And so you're not sort of doing it, you're doing it. And this is what we tend to do when we want to try and make others comfortable and also make ourselves comfortable, minimise what we're doing and our achievements.
And it's finding the way that you communicate that's comfortable to you, and that everybody hears that, and it's not a brag and it's not a boast. It's just a matter of fact. Well, it's what I'm doing. This is what you're supporting me to do. Yeah, you really help me. And I think the other thing that I learned from you very, very much, which was just the worst thing for me, but it was fantastic, all right,
was
asking other people their opinion of me.
Yeah.
So you gave an exercise to ask, I think, 7 or 8 people, if I was to appear in a magazine, what would the magazine be, and what would the article be about? And as part of a sort of a 360 with people in the company, externally, relations. So there were lots of questions around it, but that was one of them. I always remember that one. And I think I had some very interesting responses, didn't I?
Visceral, I would say.
But, one, it was just like, it was just the most positive thing I've ever done, was to go out and ask people, because when you hear what people think about you, and you can be quite honest and open about where you could be, but people generally don't see the things that you worry about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think once you realise that, then that sort of imposter bit of you starts to go away. I think that understanding in a formulaic way that we did this, okay, what people see in you,
Yep.
or how they see you.
Yep.
Can you go, really? Did you really think that? You know, and it was like nails down the blackboard for me to actually have to do it. But it was the thing I think that really changed my thinking about how I want to be in a business environment, what I want to do. And it gave me that confidence to be more clinical about the way I think about
what
that.
you bring as well.
What you bring and all the values and qualities that you have, where you want to be and how you're going to get there. So it was a tremendously difficult exercise.
But I did it yesterday with someone who also had a nail down there. So what's interesting, and this is something again that you can use straight away, is when you've got your growth mindset going on and you've got all the things you've done. So let's say that. Look at some of the things that you've struggled with as well. Look at some of the stuff that's happened. Because here's a really valuable formula. It's like a cocktail. If you mix credibility with vulnerability, it's very compelling. Everything isn't a breeze. You haven't made this project come home under budget by being asleep. You know, it was tough. There were moments when, there are times when. One of the things I struggle with, you know, my dyslexia, XYZ, it's a gift and it's also a curse. You know, being able to be open enough to be able to tell people some of the struggles at the same time as the things that you've done really well, that makes it easier for others to take on. Yeah. It also frees you from being perfect, which is a whole other subject. And people will give you the credit for it. One of the things I learned when I started my business, and you will have heard me speak on stages and, with my knees knocking, probably my teeth chattering, was this whole idea of being able to be credible enough to be in front of the audience and why should you listen to me? Yeah. But also adding to it some of the things I've struggled with and some of the things that aren't so easy, and you'd never know this. And this is where I was able to free myself. My husband had observed that when I was speaking, I used to slap my thigh quite a lot. And that was adrenaline in my body trying to get out. And he was like, what's with the thigh slapping?
What are you doing?
And when I realised that, I just thought, I have got to do something about this. So I had my own version, my own coach who supported me through being able to speak on stages. And now, I could throw myself in front of an audience, not trying to be perfect, but trying to engage by understanding maybe what's going on with them, but also not being brilliant. There are moments when, or one of the biggest struggles I've had is X. Yeah. And when you're presenting, for example, to a board about a project, you don't have to make it all shiny. These are some of the things that we came up against that we've learnt. Yeah. This is where we really thought we'd hit the wall. This is where, XYZ happened, and this is what we've done and learnt.
It's sort of bringing in those... Failure is where you learn as well, isn't it? And you have to... Nothing is perfect. There are moments that don't go as well, and you could perceive them as failures. But they're good. It's good to fail, because that's the only way you learn. But companies have to create that space that supports people
enough with that,
to allow people to be brave enough to admit where they failed, it's not gone as well as they thought and why, but they've worked out why that is and might do it differently next time, because then that's a learning thing. And I think we have to be comfortable with understanding that that's okay, isn't it? And that just starts, I think, to quieten down the imposter and the voice in our heads that says, oh, I could have done that. No, so I think that's it's a really interesting point to throw in there. I think you've just raised. I mean, the conversations I had with you really made me challenge my thinking, and you helped me with all sorts of conversations around money.
Oh yes, hello.
Money. Totally crap at talking about money. Before I met you,
you were doing it for free, weren't you?
I was not doing it. It was like a charity. So, we've got to be confident enough to understand what our value is.
I think the word, and I'm going to challenge you, confidence is a byproduct of self-belief and self-worth.
Yep.
Because people say, I need more confidence. I need to be more confident. She's so confident. And it's, okay, well, what is it? You can't buy it. And yet it's measured, more
Yep.
confidence. And I absolutely believe and have been able to prove it, that it's a byproduct of self-belief and worthiness.
Yes.
So when you're confident enough to talk about money, you're feeling worthy. You've
Yeah.
got proof. You've not
Yep.
just wandered in saying, I'm pretty good at what I do.
Oh,
You've got proof.
Yep.
And you feel worthy enough to put yourself forward. Now, sometimes, particularly in financial services, women can say, oh, but I earn about 6 times what a nurse earns. And of course, but you're not a nurse, and you're in this playground where you look around and it's like, well, why shouldn't I be part of this? Why shouldn't? Yeah. And what you choose to do with the money is one thing, but it's a way of keeping score.
Yes, it is. And I think is going back to your point about flexibility being a good driver around imposter and changing behaviours. It's not necessarily asking for money these days. It's asking for a different structured environment, isn't it? And so understanding what you're bringing and your worth to a company and the benefits they get for allowing you to just maybe behave slightly differently in how you want to structure your working week. Yep. It's not just a money conversation. No. It's about that bit and feeling, I'm great at this and I can do this till the cows come home. But it'd be great if I could do it in this environment because it'd be so much better.
Exactly.
Anyway, so
I'll make you more money, or I'll make, it's always about what you are going to make or save.
Yeah.
And as soon as when you start to focus on every single thing you're doing, looking at it through that point of view for the business, not for you necessarily.
For the business.
But for the business. Yeah. And then you become more business-like yourself. You're like, I remember a woman saying, I just put the spreadsheet together for the team. I said, okay, well, what do those spreadsheets do? They make the decisions on how much they can underwrite and how much they can take. So I said, well, so it's really important that those spreadsheets are correct. Oh, yes, they get analysed. I get pulled into meetings and questioned about the spreadsheets. So I said, you're not just making spreadsheets. You're helping them make big financial decisions based on your knowledge. How does that sound in comparison to what you said? She was like, oh, I'm a bit scared of myself. But this is the thing.
It is the thing. And we could go on talking for ages. And I'm conscious that we're coming up to the end of our time, Kate. So what would you like to say in sort of to recap what we've talked about? Is a particular message you want to leave us? We've got the magic word yet, which I think everybody should remember. So what would you like to leave us with?
Well, first of all, I would like to give you what Robert Kiyosaki said, who wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is a great book about the difference between. And he said, it's not what you say out loud that determines your life. It's what you whisper to yourself that has the most power, which goes back to our inner critic.
Yeah.
It's not what you say out loud that determines your life. It's what you whisper to yourself that has the most power. And I think that's a really significant thing to listen out for. If someone wants to have a conversation with me, because you might be listening to this and think, I might do a Karen. I don't work with just anyone, and I don't expect you to either. But I have an application with a few questions that will make you think. And once I've read those, we might jump on a call together.
Okay.
And decide if we want to work together.
And I would heartily recommend people listening in to, if that's there, my own personal experience, take it because it's
commitment either side.
No, but it's such a great exercise
and I understand that.
It made a huge difference to me, Kay. So I think that's all good advice, and having an opportunity to perhaps talk further with you is something I would absolutely endorse people.
I always learn from those conversations as well, and I now have so many stories to share. And then if we decide to do something further, the organisation will obviously invest in you, or you invest in yourself. That's another story. But my whole point is to not sit there thinking, I don't know where to start. So that would be one thing.
Okay.
I want to recommend a book, and I think this is really goes back to that whole just do it. Work out the details as you go along, but say yes before you're ready. Put yourself forward for things. And it's a book by Mel Robbins, who you may or may not have heard of. Again, another link. It's called The 5-Second Rule, and I love it.
Go on.
And the principle is, when you think of doing something, or you think of saying something, or you think of writing or picking up the phone, and we question ourselves, and then the moment's gone. Mel Robbins' whole industry that she's built up is written on the basis of a 5 seconds. So you go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I'm doing it. You don't count up because you might go on forever.
Yeah, okay. You count down.
You count down.
Yeah. I'll just get to 10.
It's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to pick up the phone. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to and do these things, and then you work. Again with this backdrop of trusting yourself more and listening to the good more. The 5-second rule will help you implement more as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm going to draw stumps on this now, Kate. It's been a fantastic hour with you. I'm so happy that you agreed to do this with us on our Leading Ladies podcast, and just a heartfelt thanks. It's been great to spend some time talking to you about, busting this imposter syndrome. So thank you very
Karen.
much.
I've enjoyed it as well. Very
Excellent.
Much. And I'm very proud of you as well.
Oh, stop. We're going to come down to welling up now. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening, and thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye for now.